being up here, it's now
Right.
knocked down here,
Right.
price wise.
That's actually what I do.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So.
All right, I'm hearing you. And Doris is there. Hi, Doris.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
How are you?
Doris,
Thank you.
here we have Jason. Oh, there's people showing up here. Okay, iPhone cars showed up.
Wow.
All right,
it's
so
live
here's,
people. Hi, Jason.
yes,
Hello.
David. Liz, Lynn. There is
Rabbi Karsh is here.
a live studio audience and an iPhone Karsh is here. Is that Dad?
Yeah,
Hi, how are
that's
you?
us. Are you there, Howard?
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you. Excellent. Good to hear you guys, hear your voices.
It's good to see you.
And okay, so I was mentioning to Doris that we have our studio audience is growing.
Yes, I see that.
We have 4 present. We're gonna break that.
Taped before live.
It is taped before a live audience in the Ed Sullivan studio in New York.
Yeah. So, that's going back in time.
Well, it doesn't have to, because I think the Colbert, the Steve, the late night,
Does he take there?
late
Yeah.
night, I think. There, and David Letterman. Before that, I recently saw a clip of Robin Williams on David Letterman,
Oh, wow.
and it was shortly after Dave Letterman went to the Ed Sullivan studio, and Robin Williams was in complete Robin Williams form. They were thinking of connecting him to some kind of cable so that he could provide energy for New York City. Would
Actually
be able to.
saw him in Vegas. He was a riot. He was an absolute riot.
Yeah.
I can deal with
I
that.
could not stop laughing. He just keeps going at it. It's like,
Yeah, this is
nonstop.
what.
Even the riot. Great guy.
Alrighty. I was a fan of Jonathan Winters.
I love him too.
And when I found out that Robin Williams was also devoted to Jonathan
Yeah.
Winters,
Oh,
that
Winters
was a
is like
huge
his
thing.
mentor.
Yeah.
Right,
Hi. He's awesome.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably it took long enough, it dripped.
The two of them.
Hopefully it
Remember
will
the
be.
program Mark and Mindy?
Hopefully
Yeah.
will bring it soon
They,
too.
Yeah.
they now have the shows right now with both of them on. And he was playing his son.
Yeah,
Jonathan was
that's-
playing the kid.
I love
That was
that
like
concept.
a big kid.
Even that concept. That was on regular TV.
Right.
That was just on regular
I
TV.
know.
How was that on regular TV?
Seeing Jonathan Winters play that role. And Robin played the dad. Came out of an egg. Born out of an egg.
Okay. All right. So
We are in the wilderness.
we are in the wilderness, Bat Midbar, in the desert. So the Torah portion of Bamidbar is essentially about counting. There is a counting, hence the translation of Bamidbar, the English name based on the Greek name, which is numbers.
Yes.
And in the Gemara, by the way, when they refer to this book, they refer to it as Pekudim, which is numbers or countings. So the Gemara agreed. Every time we come to something like that, I am forced to, it's like some kind of tick, some kind of OCD related tick that I have to say out loud, how come we changed from the way the rabbinic terms for these books to call them the names that we call? I know why we call it Bamidbar, because it's one of the first words of the book and it's a significant word, so they chose that to name it. But they had a rabbinic name for that book a long time before that was widely used in the Gemara. So I don't know why they felt they needed to change it, but they did. So anyways, the subject matter of this week's Torah portion is counting. And that's pretty much it.
That's it. We're
There's
done.
counting, and then there's stuff about the Levium, a little bit of discussion of the roles and responsibility of the Levium in the putting together, taking apart, and transportation of the Mishkan, which is going to continue into next week's Torah. Not next week's Torah portion after, because next week is going to be Shavuos. So I'm not going to have that Torah portion. Anyway, so counting is a subject that is fraught with concern and possible danger when it comes to counting people. We have, I'm going to call it a rule. There are many who call it a halacha, a law, that you are not supposed to count people. This is a deep Jewish notion. Some people might use the word custom, but it is mentioned in halachic works as prohibited for Jews to count people. Now, that may seem funny to you because when
A lot of them.
we're often counting, the Torah is counting them, and Jews tend to count Jews. For instance, when it comes for time for prayer, we have minyan. How do we even characterize? We characterize the quorum, right? So we characterize the gathering for prayer often as minyan. Minyan means counting, because there is a minimum number to reach a quorum so that you can pray as a community, which is 10 people. But when it comes to figuring out if there in fact are 10 people present, you'll find people with all different kinds of systems for counting, because you're not supposed to directly count them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You're not supposed to count people that way. So you instead, there are verses that you could use. Hoshia et amecha, uvorech et nachalatecha, ureim v'naseim ad olam. That has 10 words in it. The blessing Hamotzi lecha min haaretz has 10 words in it. So there's some people who go Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kichanu v'sozo v'tzvano. No. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lecha min haaretz. So there are people who count that way, and there are people that use Jason's methodology, which is not 1, not 2, not 3, or they count like yarmulkes. I'm not counting people, I'm counting yarmulkes. By the way, this was such a deep issue that when it comes to Israeli census, there is almost a kind of uproar every time Israel conducts a census, because you're not supposed to count people. So, and there are, by the way, different halachic opinions about whether you can even take part in the Israeli census. I saw in a Or Sameach and asked the rabbi there, they quoted Rabbi Yoshev, who was the great halachic authority from just a few years ago, bless his memory, who said that you can partake in it, but the census takers themselves are asked to not count the people, but count the identity numbers or something in order to solve some of this problem. There's also the computers are tabulating, it's not people, but still at some point there might be people counting people, and they're being asked not to do it in the normal way, because that's how far this can go. This whole business about counting, it has some kind of a heebie-jeebie element to it, which we are warned about in the Torah. The Torah does warn it. Again, it's not one of the 613 mitzvahs, but the Torah does warn when they take the census in Kisisa over there. The Torah warns not to count the people directly, but count them using half shekel coins. Here in Bamidbar, it doesn't actually talk about using a half shekel coin, but the assumption is that they did, because they wouldn't want to count directly. There's even a story in the book of Shmuel, towards the end of the book of Shmuel, when they're talking about the life of King David, where King David insisted on taking a census, even though his chief of staff, Yoab, was concerned about this. He insisted on taking a census, and there was tragedy that happened afterwards, And there's all sorts of question. Why would David do that? Didn't he know about that? Everybody knows about it. When he have known it? Apparently Yoav was concerned about it. Why would he insist on doing it? And there's lots of discussion about that over there. We ourselves are a little bit sensitive to numbers, having one of the symbols of the mistreatment of human beings by the Nazis, Yimach Shemam V'Zichram, is that they reduced everybody to numbers. And instead of thinking of people as people, they reduce people to numbers. So in a kind of ironic twist, you can have the complete dehumanization of people by thinking of them as numbers. On the other hand, you have all these times when we ourselves are concerned about numbers. You could see the practical reason for a census. You've got services, you've got representation, you have all these things that depend on how many people there are. You have to have some idea of how many people there are. So on the one hand, you have, even here, even in the Torah, you're count. There's a reason why they're counting people. They need to know how many people are going to be in the army. Most likely, that's the count here, is to figure out how how many people there are. Eventually, to be able to figure out what kind of army we'll have and how to divide the manpower and stuff. So there's very practical need for it on the one hand. On the other hand, you have this concern. So on several occasions, where Moshe Shapiro, blessed memory, would talk about something like this, and mostly because he wanted to emphasize that when we encounter the infinite, because there are in our spiritual pursuit, we find ourselves always noticing the infinite, that which is without boundary, that which in a sense can't be counted. We notice it and we value that which we call infinite, but we recognize the problem, which is, how do you encounter the infinite, especially when we think of ourselves as finite. We think of ourselves as finite, and we think that we live in a finite world. And so we find this, and when I say we, I'm speaking on behalf of all of humanity. We find this, we humans, to be sort of paradoxical. We do it, but we're not quite sure how we do it. We find ourselves encountering the infinite, engaging the infinite, thinking about the infinite, but we're not quite sure how that's possible, because aren't we finite? After all, we're made up of matter. We live in space. We live in time. We think of these as these are the building blocks of our thinking. We can't think outside of these contexts. They are finite contexts. We can't think outside of them. So when, for instance, we're told, don't think about what happened before creation. That phrase, that before creation, itself is a contradiction in terms, because creation is the beginning of time and space and matter. Before is not a notion that would apply in a place that is not of time, space, and matter. There is no before in a world where there is no time. But we talk about it. We say, don't think about that. Don't think of anybody who thinks about that. It's better they didn't even come into the world. Just a quote from the Mishnah. It's not worth thinking about it. In fact, in Brief History of Time, Stephen Hawking, Brief History of Time. So he mentions that somebody asked Augustine, what was God doing before he created the universe? And he said he was creating hell for people who ask questions like you. And he talks about it. Stephen Hawking talks about how it's not worth the effort to try to think about before the Big Bang, because you don't have the tools to think about it. So I remember, of course, the minute you're told not to think about it, I quickly started thinking about it, because that's what happens. And they know that full well. When they say don't do it, they know you're going to do it anyways. So I found myself doing it and thinking about it. And one of the problems was I realized I'm trying to think about nothing. It's no thing, it's no space, it's no time. I'm trying to think about nothing. And that's a mistake. That's a mistake, because at least the narrative that we're told in the Torah is that before creation, there was God. In other words, there wasn't nothing. In fact, our understanding of God is there was everything. God is not something, he's everything in a certain sense. He might be the only thing in some theological sense, that other things are nothing when put next to God. He is the only thing of substance. So he's everything, or the only thing. That it's not true to say that before creation there was nothing. There wasn't nothing. There was, in a certain sense, everything. And this is captured by a teaching of the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, when he says that the world is not something from nothing. Even though we tend to think of the creation ex nihilo, something from nothing. But he said the world's not really something from nothing. The world is nothing from something. Because before creation, there was everything. And then the world, when in the creation of the world, God, in a certain sense, has to contract.
Was that the Arizal?
The Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria. So it's so in a sense, God has to contract in order for there to be the space for the universe. This goes to mind-bending places, which you should be, because again, we're trying to encounter the infinite. We're using finite means to encounter the infinite. So Moshe Shapiro, blessed memory, said that a lot of the words that are used for things like this are shared. They have a shared root, a shared kind of etymology. So for instance, counting, lispor, samach pei resh, mispar, samach pei resh, built from samach pei resh. Mispar is a number. So if you want to count something, it's lispor. So it has the samach pei resh, samach pei resh. That's counting. Also, if you want to tell a story, sipur, telling a story, lisaper, hashamayim misaprim kvod el, the heavens tell of the glory or the honor of God. So that word to tell a story is also samach pei resh. And he said, why? Because when you tell a story, you're using a finite methodology to approach the infinite. You have to use words, you have to use grammar, you have to use punctuation, but your goal is to reach something that's beyond. It cannot be measured. The story cannot be measured by the words that it tells. And this is similar kind of thing, the things we count numbers to. This is like Sfirat HaOmer. Sfirat HaOmer, we're counting until we get to Shavuot. So our way of doing it is to imagine Sinai. We're counting towards the event of Sinai. At some point, the event of Sinai is an encounter with the infinite. But in order to get to the encounter with the infinite, you have to use finite means. That's the world we live in. And it's the kind of strange, almost paradox of our spiritual lives, that we are always looking to encounter the infinite, but we can't do that unless we use finite means. What about music? Music is not one of the Simpe ratios, but the Samach Pei ratios, but music is a similar notion where the person who's playing the music, they study to develop technique, right? They have to develop technique, and they're playing, very restricted order of notes, and they're doing it in a very particular way, and yet the final result is something that cannot be measured. But in order to get to it, you have to, like you end up first paying attention to what appears inappropriately finite. This is a problem a lot of people have with religion. One of the problems they have with it is, do you think God cares if Shabbos, you're starting Shabbos at 6:43, and you're ending Shabbos at 7:02 or something like that, and you're looking at your watch. Is it 6:43 yet? You think God cares, what's on your watch? That is an irritation that people have with religious people, that religious people seem to be focused on these details and seem to be so concerned about minutia instead of embracing the infinite nature of the spirit or the divine. Why would you care about an exact time when Shabbos starts or an exact time when Shabbos ends, right? Doesn't that fly in the face? But the truth is, their irritation with that is not just, they might think that this only applies to religious Jews. It doesn't. This is a problem in every encounter with the infinite, every kind of thing. What would you say to somebody who's trying to learn to play music? They're trying to learn to play violin, and you just say to them, just play what your heart moves you. But I've never played it. I've never touched a violin before. It doesn't matter. Just take that violin and just play it. And whatever comes, that is music, right? Now, in some way there might be some truth to that, but nobody's going to listen to that. Nobody's going to be moved by that. Even the person who's playing is not going to be moved. Most likely, if it's a violin, the person's going to cause a great deal of anger to people around them, and possibly to themselves by the time they're finished. That you're not going to play the violin without paying attention and with lots of practice and paying attention to detail. The music is not going to come forward without a lot of concern about the finite. Even if the ultimate goal is when you listen to Itzhak Perlman play something and people speak of it in terms of the spirit, that they are moved in ways that other religious people might talk about being moved in a religious moment. That was not possible without attention to the finite for years and years and years. And even when he's playing it, finally, it's not possible for that, because that is the great mystery when it comes to encountering the infinite, that you have to begin with the finite. So counting is one of those ways. He also said Samach Pei Reish, which is also the word sapir. It's the root of the word sapir, which is often translated as sapphire, sometimes translated as diamond. But he suggested it also represents like the glass of a telescope. Like a glass of a telescope, in some contexts could be called a sapphire. And the idea is that this lens allows you to see far. Properly crafted, this finite lens gives you an opportunity to see worlds that you otherwise could not see, to approach the infinite, if not to give you the infinite. And that's the thing. So that's the thing about counting. And that's the thing about, now, again, we can use counting in a way that nullifies, because we can say you're a number. If I say you're a number, I'm now, in a sense, nullifying your infinite nature, because I'm not acknowledging that you're more than a number. So if I make you just a number, this is what we sort of rebel against this notion of a person as a number. We're offended by a person being a number. And we speak of it as if you're, in a certain sense, obliterating the unique essence of a person. So you could use a number that way, but you also can use numbers to approach something that's beyond the finite. So numbers can go in both directions, right? And again, so when we're counting, that's how we speak about our progress towards Sinai, that we count our way to Sinai. The trip of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Shavuos actually has many elements to it that suggest this problem of the finite approaching the infinite. It has this quality where it looks like you could grasp it, but when you try to grasp it, it disappears. So first of all, it's a holiday that we celebrate. We know about this holiday. If you would poll Jews in general, I think you'd find a large percentage have never heard of this holiday. Never heard of this holiday. It's been my experience. I remember even I was taking driver's ed at Mather High School. I was actually in yeshiva, but we were in the district of Mather. And so Mather provided, you could take driver's ed at Mather. And I remember taking driver's ed at Mather. And this was like 45 years ago. Most of the student body at Mather was Jewish at the time. And so in my driver's ed class, there were several other Jewish people. I wasn't the only Jewish person. And I told the instructor that I wouldn't be able to come on such day because it was Shavuos. And there was a Jewish kid in the car, and they said, there's no such holiday. There's no such holiday. I'm Jewish. I never heard of that holiday. And I think there's a lot of people that, so it's this holiday. It's a pilgrimage festival. It's one of the very important holidays. It's only a few holidays are mentioned in the Torah. And it's one of the holidays mentioned in the Torah. It is a pilgrimage festival. But a lot of people haven't heard about it. Also,
comes out in the summertime.
But it was still school. It was still school. It was in the school calendar. Now, I don't know if it would be, like in those days, school went into June.
Yes.
I don't know if it's still.
Well, it's also confusing because we have a holiday called Simchat Torah.
Yeah.
And
Now-
so people get confused. Well, wait a minute. Is
Never heard
that
of
the
that.
day that we were given the Torah? Or was this the day
So
that we were
that-
given the Torah?
Now that you bring that up, though, that holiday is not mentioned in the Torah.
Right.
Simchas Torah is a holiday that
We made
evolved
it up.
as part of Sukkot's celebration, and it's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day, and honestly, there are those, and I might be amongst them. If somebody said I could show up in the synagogue just one day a year, I would suggest Simchas Torah, and there I think a lot of people would, instead of Yom Kippur. It's if the one day you're going to show up at synagogue,
That's the day.
I would show up at that day. So, and I agree with you. And in many ways, it sounds like what you probably should be doing on Shavuos if you're celebrating the holiday of Shavuos. But
Why aren't we doing Hakavot on
right,
Shavuos?
right, and that's a legitimately good question. One answer to that is that it never says anywhere that Shavuos has anything to do with the receiving of the Torah. That's another mysterious part of Shavuos, because we celebrate it as the time when the Torah was given, but the Torah never says that's the reason for Shavuos. The Torah identifies it at first as a 50th day as part of this series of counting and a time of celebration. It seems to be associated with the first fruits. It's the beginning of the time when you bring the first fruits. It's the beginning of the wheat harvest. The Torah, and nowhere does the Torah say that this holiday is a celebration of the receiving of the Torah. Now, we know it from oral tradition. You could work it out, because if you count the 50 days, if you start on the second day of Passover and you count 50 days or 49, and then there's the 50th day, it works out to the day that the Torah was given. So you could work that out, but it doesn't anywhere say it. And this is another part of that mystery about Shavuos. Shavuos is, we celebrate Shavuos about something, but that something isn't there. Again, I'm just noticing this attempt to reach the infinite with the finite, and I'm suggesting to you that there's some step that you take. You take a step from the last, your last finite step into the infinite, so to speak. You're on some kind of a stairway to the infinite, and your last step is going to be into the infinite. Shavuos is that infinite, and it has certain characteristics that defy what we look for in the finite. We're looking for something very specific. I want to see a very specific reference. In fact, you sort of like and when we first hear about it, we don't hear about it as a really an independent thing. We hear about it as the end of a series of counting all the way. There are almost everything that we value, in everything we consider deep is like this. It can't be grasped with a finite net. So, for instance, the human soul. The human soul, many of us would say, is who we are. But you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't smell it. God. You can't see God, you can't touch God, you can't count God, you can't measure God, you can't smell God. God's four-letter name, which we say is the primary name of God, Yud, Hey, and Vav, and Hey, that name, we're not supposed to pronounce it. We claim that we don't even know how to pronounce it anymore. We don't know how to say it. We can look at it, but we can't say it. As you approach the infinite, you move away from the finite, and you don't get. I wondered recently, you know how I heard this in the name of Ramosha Soloveitchik, this Ramosha Soloveitchik who lives here, Shlita. And but I think I heard in the name of the Maharal an explanation for why after Adam and Eve eat from the tree, they are aware of their nakedness and they're ashamed. Why is that like the first reaction? Why is that the first thing? So he suggested, and again, I think I saw this in the name of the Maharal somewhere. He suggested that there was a shift in awareness from before they ate from the tree and after they ate from the tree. Before they ate from the tree, they were a soul inside of a body. And as a soul within a body, you experience the body as a kind of protection. It's a cover. So you're not vulnerable and exposed because you have a cover. You, who are the soul, that's where you're seeing the world from. You're seeing the world from the perspective of the soul. So you have a cover around you. And therefore, you're protected like a coat. But there was a shift when they ate from the tree. After they ate from the tree, they no longer identified themselves as their soul, but they identified themselves as their body. There was a shift. Now their awareness comes from their body. So, and not from the soul. Now, if your awareness is from your body, there's nothing on the outside to protect you. There is no covering because your body is the outside. So they're immediately afraid because they're exposed. When they were a soul, their body covered them. But when they're a body, nothing's covering them. So now they need clothing because they're embarrassed and ashamed and exposed and vulnerable. So I was thinking about that shift and wondering if, in a certain way, there isn't a relief in thinking of myself as my body as opposed to thinking of myself as my soul. Because you can see a body, even though I never see my body. I mean, I do see my hand. I mean, I see parts of my body, but I don't see my body the way other people see it. But still, there's a relief in thinking that there's something there. And when somebody asks you, what do you do? Why are they asking you what you do? Because until they ask you what you do, what they know about you is what you look like. Now they want something else. They want something more. They want something definitive. They want something finite that they can associate with you so that they can understand you better, right? So then they find out what you do. This is typically how we do it, at least in Western culture. We find out what a person does, and then we think we know a lot more about the person. But the truth is, if we think of ourselves as a soul, that doesn't help us at all to know what you do. It may help me to find you somewhere if I need you at a certain time, but it doesn't help me to really understand, because it's a folly to try to grasp something that is infinite with something that's finite. But it gives us tremendous relief once we find out what they do. I know, like, for much of my career, the people that were my bosses did not know what I do. I was even warned about it. I when I was studying at Marquette, I was studying guidance and counseling. And guidance and counseling is in the education department. When you get a degree in guidance and I don't know if it's still the case. I'm assuming it is. That was the case, let's say 30 years ago. But in guidance and counseling is in the education department because guidance counselors were needed for schools. That's where they were, creating guidance counselors. So we were told in one of our courses that if you are going to be a guidance counselor in a school, you're going to have a problem, which is everybody's going to try to get you to do things because they don't think you do anything, because you just sit in a room. It's not clear to them what you do. So you have to come up with strategies. Now, when I actually had to start doing this when I was working, not as a guidance counselor, but I was working, let's say, in the way I teach, what's called outreach. In my teaching, a lot of times it doesn't look like anything. My wife is convinced that I've never done anything my whole life. I just sit around and schmooze with people, and it doesn't, there's no actual work. I once got paid. I actually saw this guy. A few months ago, I went to Or Sameach, and I met the Rabbi Myers, his name is, and I told him, I just want you to, I still remember you handing me my paycheck one month and saying to me, what do we pay you for? And he was paying me while I was doing what it is they hired me to do, but it doesn't look like you're doing anything when you do what I do. because it just looks like you're sitting around schmoozing with people. So we were told, like, have a board with a list, like have flyers for different things, have stuff around, have faces of the people that you interact with, have stories, have testimonials. This was even in when I was studying to be a guidance counselor, because otherwise people are not going to think you do anything. Their main thing was you're going to be made a hall monitor, you're going to be made a gym teacher, you're going to be made a whatever, because obviously you've got the time to do it and you don't do anything else and we're paying you, so you might as well do something that right. So, and I remember even at the Chicago Community Cola when I was doing outreach, like I based on this advice, I had an easel with a list of different classes I was giving, and I would started doing that. I would have like testimonials and people's faces and stuff like that put all around, so it would look like I'm doing stuff. And it just happened to me. I was just in St. Louis, and my one of my nephews, somebody asked, like, how many different classes do you give during a week? And my son, Srilly, who works on our newsletter, so I only know this because he worked it out. So I give, let's say 22 classes a week. That's what I do. So when they heard that, all the heads lifted around the table. They just lifted around the table. And I realized when I was looking at it, it's because they have no idea what I do, and they don't think it really is very much. How could I even be there with them if I did something? Because it was during a week. It was during a week. How am I even with them? So obviously I don't do anything. But then they heard, but there was a number associated with it. And with a number, there's like a relief. Oh, he gives classes.
22 classes.
Right. Even if I just said I teach classes, that's not useful. It's not helpful. But there's a number associated with it. Even though, what is that number?
Now you can go online and watch the classes.
Right. Or there's a place, or that was also a thing, because it's recorded.
Yes.
If it's recorded, it's a thing, then it exists. So I think there's like a tremendous relief. I think you could find that if you spoke to mankind after they ate from the tree of knowledge and you're rebuking them about the fact that, look what you did, you traded the infinite for the finite. You were living from the place of the soul, and now you're living from the place of the body. It's such a downgrade. You've made but I bet you that there could be a moment there. I would not be surprised if they said, yeah, but it's a big relief. It's a big relief because a body, we know a body. What do you do with a body? You feed it, every couple hours. It's got stuff to do. It has to do exercise. There's a lot of, you take a nap, you do all these kinds of things. What am I? Is that all I am? I'm just something that takes a nap and eats food. I'm something connected to the cosmos. But then it's like, that's just so difficult for us. We just would much rather just live in that world of finite. It's such a relief to be in that world of finite. I really do think that you could have that conversation when God is like calling us up on the table. What was going on? What was going through your mind? I'll be honest with you. There is a bit of a relief. I know it's annoying because we have to think about wearing clothing, but there's a bit of a relief not being all infinite in everything. But we are infinite. You could fool yourself and look at the finite things and ignore the infinite part, but we are. And it might be that it is without the comfort, the trappings of the finite, but it is in that space that we have natural interaction with the deepest element of things that are the source of the most satisfaction and the deepest sense of meaning and value and purpose in our lives. Our connection with God, our connection with the deepest underpinnings, which are sometimes categorized as sphirot, samach pei resh, that same number, the vehicle that allows us to go from the finite to the infinite. But the interaction with those, that's where the deepest sense and deepest purpose and deepest meaning comes from. It's in those places, because that's where we truly, that is our truest nature, not the external trappings of it. If I think of you as an accountant and you as a
Yeah, go ahead.
bookkeeper, an accountant-like human being who also did glasses.
There you go.
Yeah, if I think of you in those terms, then I could quickly move on to other things, but I've done nothing to explain why you matter in my life and what happens when we're together, why we're together. And we've had this conversation. I will have this conversation to my last breath. Even why are we here? If somebody would say, what gets accomplished here? What gets accomplished? Why are we together? Why are we together? Why do we do this? Why does it happen? It's not the information, I can tell you that, because I have no idea if this information is even true, let alone if it's significant. And it's unlikely you're even listening to what I have to say right now. And I'm cool with that. I'm totally cool with that fact that that's not why. There's something else that's going on here.
We schmooze.
That it's not even that. It's what do we mean by we schmooze? We know that the deepest element of contact is happening in this moment on a level that defies finitude. It defies breaking down, and it defies even applying some kind of metric to it. The reason why somebody would say, what am I paying you for, right, in that thing? And yet to me, it is the deepest realization of my purpose. It's the richest expression of my being when we're together. And yet we can't even say what it is. I don't even know what it is. But that's not an aberration. That's not an exception. That's the rule. Why can you not find Shavuos? Because if you have something that's that deep, it doesn't have what you're looking for. When Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach passed away, of blessed memory, the radio guys were going, who is this guy? I have looked him up. Their funeral had 300,000 people at the funeral. How is it possible? They were saying, how is it possible that there's a man who lives in Yerushalayim? I live in Yerushalayim. There's a man who lives in Yerushalayim, and 300,000 people show up at his funeral, and I never heard of him, and I've looked him up. They said, I've Googled him. I've looked him in every, I don't know if they said Google at the time. I don't know if they Google, but they looked up using every means that they knew how to look him up, and they could not find him. They cannot find him. Right? But that's not the exception. That's the rule. That doesn't appear on a map. That doesn't appear in a who's who. That is not measured. There's no pictures of that. And that's always to be expected of the deepest things. If somebody says to you, it's so weird about Shavuos, I cannot find any aspect of how we celebrate Shavuos practically in the Torah. I mean, other than, it's a holiday, you're not supposed to do work. Other than that, I can't find anything else about it in the Torah. And people are going, wow, that's weird. That is weird. That's not weird. That is to be expected. That's when you're dealing with something that is this level of deep. It doesn't. And so counting and storytelling and the sphirot, all that, and the lens of a telescope, they all share that samach pei reish. They all share that root of samach pei reish, and they all share this quality, which is they are finite means to an infinite end. They are somehow a way to get to the infinite, even though they themselves are finite. And that last step, like picture that last step. If you had a painting and you have somebody like going up like one of those airplane, the steps into an airplane, how they used to always have it.
Mhm.
You still can get it on Turkish Airways sometimes, where you're walking into the airplane. So you're walking up the steps, and then you just see the person take the last step and they disappear. I am grateful for this opportunity for us to study together or do whatever it is that we do together. And I look forward to doing it. I suggest next week, if I was going to be here.
Oh,
Uh,
if,
Now I realize I am going to disappear. That I am going to be in St. Louis again. So I am not going to be here next week. We are not meeting next week. In theory, we could. I'll be honest with you. In theory, I could Zoom it. But my problem has been when I travel, I just don't feel we could get together, but it doesn't work. My
Yeah.
brain
Your head
is like
isn't
cement.
where-
Yeah, it doesn't go.
Yeah.
All right, so we're not going to meet next week. So this was our pre-Shavuos meeting. And but I'm very grateful that we got together. I look forward to getting together in 2 weeks. There's Rachalea. Did you bring Rachalea into this? Lynn, she is a taskmaster.
She's amazing. I was at a bris and I said,
There you
I'm
go.
logging in soon.
There you go. Because of
Good to
Lynn.
see you.
You make sure you're here. Okay, very good to see you. Doris, excellent to see you. And Judy,
Where are you going to St. Louis for Shavuos?
no, just for 2 days. AY and I are going back to
Shavuos in
St.
St.
Louis.
Louis. How about
That would be good. That could be a
It's
movie.
just like a
Shavuos in St. Louis.
T-shirt.
When
Right.
That actually could be one. But I'll be back for Shavuos. All right. Be well. Bye-bye.
can I run something?